What's up guys, alright, welcome everyone. A man is watching the news about the new hero, Tony Stark. Then another man named Ivan comes to him, who is his father and mentor. He is very sick, and before he died he said that it was supposed to be Ivan in place of Tony Stark, but that he is leaving the knowledge with him. When his father dies, Ivan is angry, so he starts planning something. He has documents in his hands that show how to build an arc reactor and soon begins the project. Ivan proves to be a very smart guy, and little by little he recreates a similar replica of the arc reactor, and after a lot of work, he is happy when he succeeds. 6 months later, we see Tony with his armor jumping out of a plane and heading towards the Stark Expo, a stage where he is being celebrated for being Iron Man. He takes off his costume, and after the dancers perform, he talks to his public feeling a little flat, because the world paused wars because of him. Tony then shows a video of his late father, Howard Stark, where he talks about the world needing to develop new technologies. Soon, he presents a table and on it a model of what he wanted for the future of people. After the introductions, Tony is walking away when a bailiff comes to him, and hands him a subpoena for him to appear before a government armed forces council. The next day, already in Washington, at the hearing, Tony is confronted by Senator Stern, asking if it is true that Tony has a specialized weapon in his hands, but Tony said that what he has does not fit in the world of weapons. He jokes that the armor is actually a technological prosthesis. Then the senator, in ambition to have weapons over American power, says that Tony must hand it over to them. However, Tony says that he and the armor are only one, the senator not understanding weapons, so he calls an expert, a man named Justin Hammer, and he comes in to make his point. Soon after, Colonel James Rhodes, a friend of Tony's due to military obligations, was summoned to deliver a report on Tony's armor. At the senator's request, he read a separate passage out of context, where he says that the armor, since it is not under American control, becomes a possible danger to America and its interests. The senator, after that, shows satellite images of a place where they are trying to replicate Tony's armor, but trying to hide the real videos. So Tony hacks his server and shows that some countries are trying to replicate his armor. However, not being successful and ending up killing himself in the tests, including Hammer also making attempts in vain, Tony, after lowering the ball of the government, tells everyone that he will not have his armor, but says that in it they will have a guarantee of safety. Therefore they are safe, for he said he brought peace again. Meanwhile, Ivan watches Tony's hearing. Moments later, he finishes his project, which we can see is a type of electrified cable, with high destructive power. Back at home in Malibu, in his garage, where the armor is, Tony wakes up Jarvis, and his artificial intelligence congratulates him on the rating. However, after becoming Iron Man, Tony has a problem in his bloodstream, where the palladium core of the arc reactor that keeps him alive and feeds the armor, is slowly poisoning him, so he needs to medicate himself to reduce the toxins that spread through his body due to the continuous use of the armor. Tony needs to change the palladium core whenever he is now more advanced, but who has this evil for him? Tony doesn't allow Pepper to see this, but she arrives and tries to talk to Tony to get things right at the company, but he soon tells her that from now on, she will be the new president of Stark Industries. The choice is due to the trust he has in her and the excellent work she has been doing at the company. So with this decision by Tony, Pepper is both surprised and excited. Meanwhile, in a scheme from Moscow, Ivan receives a package from a man. It contains a passport and a ticket to a race in Monaco. Back in Tony's life, he now spends time training with his driver. Pepper signed the documents delivered by the new possible secretary of the Stark company, Natasha, an undercover agent for S.H.I.E.L.D. Tony, looking at her, calls her to participate in boxing training. She accepts. However, Tony does not fight and goes to watch from the outside along with Pepper. So without them waiting, Natasha, being an excellent fighter, easily knocks Tony's driver to the mat. This leaves them very impressed, so Tony asks Pepper to have her as his secretary, but she, being the new boss, does not allow it. Race day arrives, and there we see Pepper, Tony and their driver happy with Tony's briefcase. After that, they enter a hotel and meet Natasha, where Tony hired her without Pepper knowing to be the new secretary. Later in his cabin, Tony notices that the toxin has spread further in his body and has reached a higher level. However, he is not discouraged. Tony is going to participate in the race where his company is part, when Hammer and the reporter Christine see what Tony is about to do, and without Pepper's consent, who sees him on the racetrack, is very worried. The race begins, and, meanwhile, Ivan is undercover as a firefighter. Moments later, he invades the track and shows himself to everyone. It then reveals its armor, which, when activated, burns its clothing, showing it to be a skeletal suit robot that has 2 electrified chains as a means of attack, having great power of destruction. Pepper, seeing this along with Happy, take the car and invade the racetrack, going against Tony, who, being surprised, has his car split in half. Tony then sees Ivan causing a huge accident on the track and heading towards him. Pepper and Happy go against the race cars and, meanwhile, Ivan approaches Tony's car trying to finish him off. However, when you see, he was no longer there. Tony tries to surprise Ivan, but is unsuccessful and is soon countered by the enemy's electrical currents. That they barely miss him, Tony is cornered, but luckily, before the evil reaches him, Happy arrives throwing the car over Ivan, trapping him against the protective wall. When Tony was getting in the car, Ivan wakes up and attacks again, breaking their car into parts. Scared, they throw the briefcase to Tony, which is actually his armor, and this time the suit is even more sophisticated, however, still being a beta form of a new armor. Tony then tries to attack Ivan, but with the electric currents he defends himself and counterattacks. Ivan grabs Iron Man and throws him from side to side. Then, he activates more power in his suit and releases energy to Tony's armor, hoping to melt it. However, being similar energy, it does not cause damage to Tony, who, rising, coils the chains on himself. He then approaches Ivan, knocks him down and destroys his suit. After the scare, and with Ivan already arrested, Tony returning home in his jet, he hears on the news that the governor talks about the Iron Man armor, claiming that Tony uses it as if it were a toy. He sits with Pepper, and seeing him crestfallen, she asks him what he was hiding from her, but Tony still doesn't speak. Meanwhile, in a prison, we see Ivan receiving his food and in it is a small explosive. Then, a prisoner is placed with him, having the same number, so he already understood what was happening. Ivan knocks the man out and is also given a key. He activates the bomb and leaves the cell, knocking out a guard in front of him. When the bomb explodes, the alarm activates. Soon after, 2 police officers dominate him and take him outside, leaving him inside a van. After a while, Ivan is taken out of the van and we see that he has been taken to Hammer, who welcomes him very well, and says he wants to discuss business with him. Hammer says he can give Ivan the resources to go further than he did with Tony in the race in Monaco. Van agrees, however, he asks for his bird back. At Tony's house we see him researching more about Ivan's life and discovers that his late father, Anton Vanko, was an excellent Soviet scientist who took shelter in the United States, but was soon deported on suspicion of espionage. Rhodes arrives at this point and goes to talk to Tony about starting to make a stand about the continued pressure on him regarding the Iron Man armor. Tony doesn't turn around and when Rhodes approaches, he discovers that his friend is in bad shape. Soon, Tony asks for his help to change the palladium in his reactor, but does not say the real situation in which he lives. On the other hand, Hammer takes Ivan to work at his facility, giving him access to new technology and pre-made suits. Hammer, aiming to outrun Tony, is not threatened by Ivan being able to easily hack his firewall without difficulty, as he is much more interested in his help with his projects. Later, Tony looks in the mirror and once again sees his body being consumed by radiation from the arc reactor. Thinking he doesn't have much time to live, he gets ready to go to his birthday party. However, at his party, he dresses in his armor and, already a little drunk, dances with the guests. Rhodes arrives and Pepper shows Tony the situation, which soon disappoints him, and soon he asks Pepper to take care of it. When she goes to try to calm Tony down, she tells him to end the party. However, Tony tells the audience that the party is just getting started. Then use your armor to break some things and cheer the crowd. Rhodes, unable to take Tony's disorder any longer, leaves the ballroom and goes to where the other armors are stored, while Tony continues to do his crazy things. When suddenly, Rhodes appears using Tony's Mark II and orders everyone to leave the hall. Tony then says he's going to beat him up and the fight between the two begins. At first they break some parts of Tony's house, but Tony, having more experience with armor, manages to dominate the fight against Rhodes. The two fight and cause even more damage to the house, forcing everyone to leave the place urgently, but not everyone leaves, and they end up staying and recording while the two fight. Tony, seeing it, immediately scares them, so that they get out of there. When then, Rhodes soon hit Tony with the sink. Then, the two in front of each other, point their hands and shoot, causing the explosion of energy. After all the damage, Tony awakens and sees James leaving with the Mark II armor. The next day, we see that Rhodes has taken the armor and handed it over to the American army, leaving everyone in awe. Later, Tony eating some donuts is called by Nick Fury to talk for a while. However, Tony says he doesn't want to join his group, but suddenly a woman enters, and leaves Tony stunned, as he discovers that Natasha is, in fact, a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and works for Fury. She explains that when S.H.I.E.L.D. discovered that Tony was sick, she was sent to take care of him right away, so she injects Tony with an injection of lithium dioxide where it slows the progress of the infection. Tony takes advantage and says that he tried everything to replace palladium, but Fury says that not everything. Back at Hammer, he takes a bird to Ivan, who was working. However, upon seeing the armor, Hammer realizes that no one can fit inside. Asked what that was, Ivan says that without a pilot it was better. Hammer, however, is irritated, but even so, he says that it's good that it works out. Already at the American Air Base, Rhodes shows the general the armor. Then, the general asks Rhodes to call Hammer to put more weapons in the armor. Rhodes, however, doesn't think this is a good idea. However, you must do so, as they are direct orders. Fury talks to Tony in the destroyed house and, in conversation, Tony asks what he meant by not trying everything. Fury says he's the only one who has the resources and intelligence to finish what his father started. Tony doesn't see his father as a real father and says that Fury doesn't know anything about him. However, Fury says he does, as Howard was one of the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D. Tony is surprised, however. Fury has an appointment and leaves the place, but first leaves him a box. Meanwhile, at the military base, Hammer arrives to see the armor that Rhodes has taken and soon begins to show what he has to offer. To equip the weapon, Hammer specializes in powerful weapons and, after presenting several of them, shows a missile that he says is his greatest firepower. With that, Rhodes finally chooses everything for armor, then let Hammer make the changes. At home, Tony takes a look in the box, finds his father's projects along with Vanko, some cassette tapes in a notebook of formulas. In one of the tapes, Howard addresses Tony as a child, showing him the model of the city of the future, saying that he did all that for him and that is his legacy for Tony, a work of his life in the future for the world. Howard said he is limited in the time he lives. However, Tony will figure out the solution and will change the world. At the last moment, his father says that his greatest creation was Tony. The next day, Tony, wanting to change things, goes to his company to talk to Pepper, but now she was very busy. She is upset with him, receives him and shows her annoyance for what Tony failed to do for her and for the company in which she is now responsible. After that, she leaves with Happy and Natasha to deal with company business, while Tony stays to remove his things. He observes the model built by his father and decides to take a closer look, suspecting there is some message in it. Tony picks it up and takes it away. Later, Jarvis scans the model and shows Tony from other possible angles. So Tony, with his incomparable intelligence, begins to unravel a project hidden by Round in that model, and after a while separating unnecessary parts, he ends up understanding what his father had discovered before, a new element capable of replacing palladium forever. However, Jarvis says it's impossible to synthesize something like that. However, Tony, being a genius, has a plan in mind. Having resources, he starts building what looks like a particle accelerator, and after a while, he manages to finish what Jarvis calls a prismatic accelerator. Tony, then, tries to direct the accelerator's energy to a triangular piece, and such energy is able to cut everything in front of it. Finally, he reaches Persian, where the material, after receiving this energy, is able to store it. Jarvis congratulates Tony, because now he managed to create a new element. Tony then adapts it for use in his reactor, where fortunately, this energy core is compatible and will thus replace palladium. Meanwhile, Ivan is still secretly working on something and gets a call from Hammer and tells him that the project won't be ready to present on the scheduled date. However, we see that he designed something more powerful for himself. Hammer, not satisfied with Ivan's delay, arrives the next day and goes to him, taking the bird and his belongings from him. Hammer expresses his indignation at the non-compliance with the deal they had made, but says he doesn't care much about what Ivan did or didn't do, as he claims he has Tony's armor now and will surprise in the demonstrations. He threatens Ivan and says that if he doesn't fulfill the deal, he would be a dead man. Then he leaves 2 guards with Ivan, while he goes to Stark Expo. Later, Tony at home gets a call and is surprised to learn it's Ivan. We soon see that he has killed the 2 guards and uses the internet network to communicate with Tony. He said that what Tony's family did to his family, he'll do worse to Tony in a few minutes. Worried about what it could be, Tony takes his new source of energy and uses it with the infection, which recedes, and he now has an even greater source of power than before. Already at night, at Stark Expo, a crowd is in place to see the presentations. Among the people are Pepper and Natasha. As it begins, Hammer takes the stage and starts talking about what Tony didn't give them, but which, however, by force, they got. Right then, he shows the new face of American power. Armor for the Army, Navy, Air Force and Marines. Elsewhere, Ivan begins hacking Hammer's server system again, to have control over the armor. Hammer, unaware of this, finally presents Colonel Rhodes with the new armor, where he now has even greater firepower. However, who steals the show once again is Tony, the real Iron Man. Tony approaches James and tries to warn him about Hammer and Ivan's involvement. When Tony goes to question Hammer about this, Rhodes begins to have his armor hacked by Ivan, who soon triggers the weapons, so the other robots point their weapons at Tony. Tony immediately leaves the place and has the armors follow him and try to kill him. Hammer, you go check it out and find it's been hacked and blocked. Pepper and Natasha reach out to him, but have no answers. So Natasha takes the lead and dominates Hammer, questioning him, who is behind all this. He then tells who is doing this and says where Ivan is. Meanwhile, Ivan sends some robots to attack the surroundings of the Stark Expo, scaring people. Others aim to overthrow Tony, but without success, and end up being destroyed. When a little boy tries to imitate Tony facing a robot, Iron Man arrives at the last moment and destroys the enemy armor. Tony continues to be chased and dodges the attacks ordered by his enemy. On the other hand, Natasha goes to the medicine factory to get Ivan along with Happy. He faces one of them, while Natasha, being an excellent fighter, faces some guards using her arsenal of tricks and skills. She easily finishes her opponents. On the other hand, Happy is happy to take down just one, no comparison to Agent Romanoff's art. Ivan, seeing Natasha approaching and knowing that she was an excellent fighter, prepares his armor to leave. Tony, using Jarvis's help and making his way to a large exposed globe, traces a trajectory and escapes from some armor, making them collide against the construction, thus destroying itself. Natasha arriving at the place does not find Ivan, then he starts messing with his computer. Already Tony is surprised by Mark II with Rhodes. They fall into an area designed as a natural environment. Rhodes, without control of the armor, can do nothing against the following attacks against Iron Man. Luckily Natasha, being also very smart, manages to reset Rhodes' armor, leaving free armor for Rhodes to reassume. The two, now in full control, prepare to face the many opponents that arrive and surround him. A battle then begins where the two shoot and destroy some enemy armor, revealing, however, that there are many. Tony decides to use one of his weapons, which is very dangerous, a highly destructive laser that quickly wipes out all robots. Unfortunately, however, not everything is over, as Ivan also arrives wearing armor, and this time, with much greater power. Rhodes says he will end the fight right then, and they're using Hammer's biggest weapon. However, the small missile is just a hoax, having no effect. Ivan then decides to attack the two using her new, more powerful electric currents, thus cutting off Rhodes' armor weapon. Together, the two try to beat Ivan's big armor, but without success. The enemy then uses his chains and clings to the necks of both. Tony soon thinks of something and tells Rhodes to aim at him, then doing the same as they did in the small fight between them. The impact of the energies causes a great wave of destructive power. After that, Tony and Rhodes see that Ivan is still alive, and he says that Tony lost. And then he triggers the detonation of all the robots, including himself. Quickly, Tony, thinking of Pepper, goes to where she was and saves her, before she is hit by explosions from Ivan's robots. He takes her to the top of a building, and there he apologizes for everything and thanks her for everything she did for him, and being forgiven, their romance begins. In the following days, Tony is called to a warehouse, and there he talks to Fury about a report that the Romanoff agent made about him, Iron Man. He is approved, however, due to what happened. Tony is not ready, but Fury wants to be around as a consultant. Tony quickly accepts, but in exchange, he asks a favor to Fury, where in Washington the senator will have to do the honors and congratulate Tony the Iron Man for the good work, and Rhodes the new War Machine. Then comes Agent Phil going to New Mexico under Fury's order, and there we can see that he went to check something that had fallen, forming a huge crater in the desert. Where we noticed, it is Thor's hammer.